Hey guys, tonight we're climbing aboard a creaky, salt-crusted medieval ship. No GPS, no compass beeping, and certainly no clocks ticking away the hours. Just the sound of waves slapping against the hull, the tang of seaweed in the air, and a crew that's somehow supposed to know when it's lunchtime, bedtime, or time to raise the sails, all without a single watch in sight. And guess what? You wouldn't have lasted a day out here. The rope burn, the sleepless shifts, and the vague sense that time is just a cruel rumour whispered by the stars. It's enough to make your iPhone battery anxiety seem charming. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is for you right now. I bet it's a bit more precise than just after the beans boiled. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step carefully onto the wooden planks of the deck, your boots echoing softly underfoot. The sun is hiding behind thick morning mist, and everything is damp, your cloak, the ropes, even your thoughts. The ship rocks gently as the crew goes about their tasks, without shouting, without watches, without asking the time. They just know. You notice an old sailor crouched low near the mast, his eyes squinting at the shifting shadows between the sails. He grumbles something about the sun hitting the third bolt by now, and you can't help but glance around, wondering what bolts and sun have to do with each other. But that's how it works here. Time isn't measured by machines, it's sensed, felt, interpreted by weathered men with salt in their beards and stories in their bones. Back then, the ship was its own little universe. Days weren't carved into hours like your neat digital clock. They were stretched and squashed by clouds, tides, and hunger. You got up when the cook banged the ladle on the pot. You slept when your eyes burned too much to stay open. And if you were lucky, you didn't fall asleep during storm watch. The fog thickens, wrapping itself around the ship like a damp blanket. Visibility drops, but nobody seems alarmed. This is normal. You squint into the mist, but can't see where the sea ends and the sky begins. For all you know, you're floating in a bowl of grey soup. Still, the crew moves with purpose. You trail behind them, watching how they glance not at a clock, but at the deck itself, at the rope's shadows curling like snakes across the wood. One sailor runs a hand along the railing, then spits and mutters, half passed by the feel of the dew. Strange but true, medieval sailors often judged the time by the quality of light and shadow on the ship. They didn't need numbers. They needed familiarity. Knowing how the morning fog thinned on the starboard side, or how the creak of the rigging changed pitch by mid-afternoon, was more reliable than any sundial. Especially since sundials were practically useless on a moving, swaying, cloud-covered ship. You lean on the rail, eyes adjusting to the gloom. Slowly you begin to notice it too. The sun, while hidden, still presses its weight onto the world. You can see the mist glow in certain directions, and yes, that shadow near the hatch really is shorter than it was before. That sailor wasn't guessing. He was reading the ship like a clock. The practice was surprisingly accurate, within a rough window anyway. It's not like they were trying to make Zoom meetings, but for a world built around tides and wind, it was precise enough. Besides, if you missed lunch, there were other signs. Your stomach would scream at you. Of course, sailors also relied heavily on routine. When you live on a ship, every task is tied to a rhythm. You swab the deck at dawn, you scrape barnacles at noon, you stare hopelessly at the horizon sometime between. It becomes muscle memory. And in the absence of bells and alarms, your body becomes the clock. You duck under a low beam, brushing aside a hanging net. Someone nearby is sharpening a blade. Slow, deliberate strokes. The rasping sound echoes like a metronome, marking time as sure as any tick-tock. And yet, even within this clockless world, there's a hierarchy. The seasoned sailors, the ones who sleep with one eye open and always seem to know when the wind will turn, are the true timekeepers. They don't count seconds, they feel them. And they're usually the ones yelling at you when you've stayed at the tiller too long, or forgotten when your shift ends. Still, it wasn't all mystical instinct. Some ships had crude visual cues, a scratch on the mast, a notch on the rail, even the way the shadow of the mainsail landed on the deck. These were the medieval sailors' version of checking the time. And yes, if you misjudged it, you'd be late for your watch, and possibly punished by spending the next shift knee-deep in bilge water. Some historians still debate just how accurate these sailors were. Could they really tell the hour based on shadows and gut feeling? Or did they just get lucky most days? There's evidence for both sides, and plenty of anecdotes to keep the argument alive. You lean back, letting the motion of the ship rock you gently. The wind hums a low, steady tune through the rigging. There's no clock here, no ticking, but somehow time flows anyway. And if you listen closely, really closely, you might just hear it passing. One wave at a time. The mist has begun to lift, just slightly. Thin slivers of sunlight pierce through the fog and dance across the deck in long, angled beams. You blink against the pale light, and then you notice it, the shadows. They're not just drifting aimlessly, they're moving. Slowly, deliberately. And here on this ship, that's more than just a poetic observation. It's how people know what time it is. There's a rhythm to these shadows, a quiet order that only the experienced crew seems to understand. One sailor crouches near a beam, squinting at the way the shadow touches a rusted nailhead, then nods to another sailor without speaking. That nod? It means it's time to change tasks, just like that. No bells, no shouted commands, just the silent choreography of sun and wood. Before clocks, sailors often relied on shadow watching, a primitive but surprisingly elegant form of timekeeping. And unlike a sundial which needed open skies and solid ground, this method was tailored to their floating world. They watched how shadows stretched across specific points on the ship, over rivets, ropes, cracks in the deck, learning over weeks and months how these markings changed with the day's progress. But you wouldn't have a clue what you were looking at. To you, it's just some sunlight sliding across some planks. And to be fair, even for them, it took time, literal time, to develop that kind of intuition. Most of the learning wasn't taught, it was absorbed. The way the ship groaned more at noon, the way the birds circled differently in the late afternoon, if any were around at all. One of the sailors laughs as he steps carefully around a beam and points to a place on the mast. Third plank touched, quarter before high tide, he mutters to no one in particular. You nod, pretending to understand, but all you really notice is how the light seems to hit that spot like it's done it 1,000 times before. The fascinating part? On many ships, these natural indicators were all they had. A lot of sailors were illiterate, and very few ships had the luxury of carrying hourglasses or sundials. Both delicate and nearly useless once the waves started rolling. And so these subtle tricks, shadows and steps, light and habit, formed a kind of living clock that shifted with every journey. Of course, you're probably thinking, why not just use the sun's position in the sky? And sure, that's what most land dwellers would do. But on a ship, you don't always see the full arc of the sun. Masts block it. Sails change its shape. Clouds can stretch across the sky for days. So sailors had to adapt, not by looking up, but by looking down. The deck became a canvas, a measuring stick, an unofficial, constantly shifting sundial, and every ship was different. On one vessel, the shadow might touch the coil of rope near the helm by mid-morning. On another, it might land across the seam in the hatch cover. Learning the ship's shadow language was like learning a dialect. and you, friend, are still at hello. Tutimisu. Yes. You lean over the railing and watch as another beam of light crosses the side of a barrel. The tar glistens, and for a moment the reflection nearly blinds you. A younger sailor shields his eyes, then calls out, "Nearly stew time," with a grin. Stew time. It's not precise, but it's shared. And in this small floating society, shared rhythm matters more than accuracy. Nobody needs to know it's exactly 11:45 a.m. They need to know when to swap duties, when to hoist sail, and most importantly, when to eat. And then there's the unexpected benefit. It slowed things down. When you can't measure every passing minute, your brain lets go of urgency. There are no alarms here, no "you have 5 minutes left" warnings. Time passes like waves, constant, unhurried, and often unnoticed until it's gone. But of course, this didn't stop every sailor from trying to be more exact. Some would mark the deck with subtle scratches, trying to line them up with where the shadow fell each day. Others kept private notes, tiny journals where they'd sketch the light's angle against the railing at different tides. It was less science, more memory, less clock, more art. Some historians still debate how effective this method was. Did sailors really use shadows with any real consistency, or are we romanticizing the guesswork of hungry, sunburned men? It's a fair question, but what's clear is that they believed in it, and in a world built on belief in the wind, the stars, the creaking wood beneath your feet, that belief was often enough. A breeze kicks up now, snapping the edge of a sail, and you hear the subtle shift of feet across the deck. One group of sailors files down below. Another group climbs up from the galley. No horn sounds, no orders are given. They just know. It's the next watch. Time has passed. You follow them, marveling at how the entire ship seems to move like a single body, its heartbeat set not by ticking gears, but by light and shadow. It's poetic, really, even if your shoes are soaked and your stomach's growling. You stand still for a moment, just watching. The sun has risen higher now, burning away some of the fog. The lines of light are clearer, sharper. You can almost guess what time it is, though you'd never stake your lunch on it. One sailor brushes past you, tossing a wink your way. Don't stare too long, or you'll start thinking the ship's trying to talk. And maybe it is. Below deck, the light fades fast. You duck through a low passage, eyes adjusting to the warm, smoky dimness of the galley. The air here is thick with the scent of boiled peas, wet wood, and something that might be old onions, or someone's feet. It's hard to tell. A pot bubbles lazily in the corner, and the cook stirs it with a spoon that looks more like a paddle. He doesn't check a timer. He doesn't glance at the fire. Instead, he leans in, sniffs once, and nods to himself. "Should be ready right after the next bell," he mutters, not to you, not to anyone, just to the stew, as if it's an old friend with punctual taste. You've heard the bells a few times now, short chimes ringing from somewhere above. They sound simple, even random, but up on deck, they're everything. Because for medieval sailors, bells were the backbone of timekeeping at sea. Ships didn't ring bells like a church counting hours. No, these bells marked watches, shifts of duty, roughly 4 hours each. Every half hour within that watch, a bell would ring. 1 bell for the first half hour, 2 bells for the next, and so on, until 8 bells signalled the end of the shift. And then the cycle would begin again. A full day at sea wasn't measured in 24 hours. It was measured in watches and bells. If someone shouted, 4 bells in the afternoon watch, you'd better know whether that meant stew time or storm prep. You climb the ladder back to the deck just in time to hear 2 short bell rings. A sailor near the helm yawns and stretches his arms. Second dog watch halfway through, he mumbles. You nod like you understand, but let's be honest. You've only just realised that dog watch is an actual term, not a crew member's pet on patrol. The dog watch was a clever little invention. Instead of 4 straight hours, it was split into 2 shorter periods, usually from 4 to 8 p.m. This meant the crew's rotation shifted slightly each day, so no one got stuck with the same grueling midnight to 4 a.m. shift over and over again. Fairness in its salty seafaring form. But the bells weren't just about fairness. They were survival. Life at sea was dangerous, monotonous, and disorienting. Without land or landmarks, the passing of time could become mushy. A fog. The bells cut through that fog. They reminded you this is your time, your duty, your turn, and they weren't always rung by a person. Some ships installed ship's bell timers, a kind of mechanical system tied to a sandglass. Every 30 minutes the glass would be turned and the bell rung. It wasn't high-tech, it was rope, weight and rhythm. But it worked. One sailor walks by now, carrying the ship's sandglass. He flips it with a flourish, watching the grains fall like slow rain. Perfect timing, he murmurs. Stew won't burn this time. You watch as he places the hourglass back in its wooden cradle near the mast. It's not fancy. It's just 2 glass bulbs tied together with twine and beeswax. But here on this creaking boat, it might as well be a Rolex. Interesting fact, some ships carried multiple sandglasses, each with different durations. One for measuring watches, one for boiling eggs, yes, really. And others for measuring sailing speed, which we'll get to soon. Medieval multitasking was real. The cook rings a smaller bell from the galley. A cheer rises from a few deckhands, and you realise something important. On this ship, even the food is a clock. Breakfast, midday stew, and a grim dinner of hardtack and dried fish. Each is a soft, edible reminder that time keeps moving. Of course, if the cook ran out of beans or overboiled the peas, well, the day just felt wrong. It'd be like missing your morning coffee and forgetting what year it is. One sailor even jokes, "We don't know the hour, but we know if the stew's late, something's cursed." You glance around and realise how deeply these patterns have embedded themselves into the crew. Time here isn't told, it's lived. The bells, the stew, the grainy fall of sand, the smell of pine tar at dusk, all of it threads together, creating a rhythm stronger than any clock. And yet, even with all this, things still slipped. On cloudy days, the sun could vanish for hours. Storms might knock over the sandglass or drown the sound of the bell entirely. Once, during a gale, a ship went 2 watches without a bell because the striker got washed overboard. No one noticed until the stew burned. Some historians debate how rigid these systems really were. Did all ships ring bells with military precision? Or did smaller crews just wing it between naps and shouting? Again, no firm answers. But what's consistent is the intent. Bells gave structure. They gave shape to the formless ocean. You lean against the railing now, feeling the salt wind on your face. A single gull circles overhead. You hear the faint ding of a bell from somewhere below, and suddenly the stew doesn't seem so far off. And there it is again, that gentle, simple rhythm. Not a countdown, not a deadline, just a heartbeat in bell tones, reminding everyone, yes, even you, that time flows even when there are no hands to show it. The deck shifts beneath your feet as the ship catches a slightly stronger breeze. Sails snap, ropes tighten, and the whole vessel groans like it's just woken from a nap. You grip the nearest beam, steadying yourself, and notice a sailor crouched near the helm, holding a length of rope, knotted at regular intervals. He's not tying anything, he's measuring. He tosses the weighted end of the rope overboard, watches it disappear beneath the waves, then begins letting the rope slide through his fingers. Every few feet a knot passes. and he counts, softly, steadily, like a chant. 1, 2, 3. After a few seconds, another sailor barks, "Stop!" and the rope is yanked back up. The two nod, satisfied. No clock involved, no modern gear. But what they've just done is measure the speed of the ship, and more curiously, how time is passing relative to distance. This is the logline method, and it was genius in its simplicity. A long rope with knots spaced evenly apart was attached to a flat piece of wood, called a log chip, and thrown off the stern of the ship. As the ship moved forward, the rope unspooled. Sailors counted how many knots passed through their hands in a set amount of time, usually measured by a 30-second sandglass. Each knot equaled 1 nautical mile per hour. And that's where the term knots as a measure of speed comes from. Yes, really. It's not a fancy naval term invented by some admiral. It's literal knots in a rope, counting out the heartbeat of the sea. You crouch beside the coiled rope, fascinated. The wood is worn smooth, the knots frayed but still sturdy. This thing has likely been thrown into more oceans than you've had hot showers. And the idea that this humble bit of string was once the gold standard for maritime speed, almost laughable. And yet, it worked. Of course, the system wasn't perfect. The rope might snag. The log chip might not float right. Sometimes the sandglass wasn't turned quickly enough, or someone miscounted the knots during a storm. But again, precision wasn't the goal. Rhythm was. Consistency, the illusion of certainty in a world where waves and weather were the only constants. You glance up. The sky has cleared slightly, and sunlight catches in the glass bulbs of the sandglass being flipped nearby. It glows golden for a moment, then the grains begin their descent. The sailor watches with half-lidded eyes, waiting for his cue to haul the rope back in. You wonder how many grains of sand have passed through those bulbs over the years. Thousands? Millions? It's a strange thought that something as fleeting as a falling grain could mark something as vast as time. One sailor grins at you and says, "Funny how we trust a bit of rope and some beach sand more than the captain's gut." That earns a chuckle from the others, but it's not just a joke. There were captains, especially arrogant ones, who ignored the rope method entirely, preferring to feel the ship's pace by instinct. Unsurprisingly, those were often the ones who ran aground. Some historians still argue about how often sailors actually used the log line. Was it daily, hourly, only during long crossings? The records are murky. Some logs mention it religiously, others never at all. But what's clear is this: when used, it was one of the earliest, most widespread forms of systematic time-distance measurement at sea. And perhaps even more importantly, it gave the crew something to trust. Something tactile, measurable. You could see the knots. You could feel them slip past your fingers. It wasn't abstract. It wasn't theory. It was rope and motion. It was now. A gust of wind rocks the ship again, and the crew springs to life, tightening sails and shouting orders. The log line is reeled in, dripping seawater onto the deck. The sandglass is tucked away in a wooden box, its sand resting still for now. You lean on the railing again, watching the endless expanse of water roll beneath the ship. Somewhere out there, land waits. But for now, all that matters is the rhythm of rope and wind and time measured not by hands on a dial, but by hands on a knot. A younger sailor joins you, chewing something that might be dried apple. "Ever think about how we measure our lives by ropes and stew?" he asks. You smile. "Only every 30 seconds. Sippers fires." Night creeps in slowly at sea. It doesn't fall like it does on land. It seeps. First the sky fades to a dim blue bruise, then to a soft grey, and finally to a dark velvet black stitched with stars. You lean on the rail, looking up. There are so many stars it feels like the sky has sprung a leak. And that's when you realize something. No one's gone to bed yet. Instead, the crew gathers near the bow, necks craned, eyes searching the heavens. A few whisper to each other, pointing. One sailor traces a shape in the air, and you swear you see the constellation form before your very eyes. A fish, a hunter, a crooked ladle. No clocks here, but plenty of celestial timepieces. Before the age of chronometers and longitude charts, sailors told time and often direction by the stars. And not just the North Star, though that one gets all the fame. There were dozens of constellations that appeared and disappeared at predictable times of the night and year. The crew knew them like you know your phone screen. That sailor with the missing tooth? He tells time by Orion's belt. The one who sings to himself while scrubbing the deck? He watches Cassiopeia rotate through the night sky. The stars weren't just pretty. They were practical. You squint up and see it now. A bright, steady light that doesn't blink like the others. That's Polaris, the North Star. In the northern hemisphere, it never moves, sitting dutifully above the pole, a kind of cosmic anchor. For sailors, it was more than a guide. It was a reassurance. If you could see Polaris, you weren't lost. But even beyond navigation, sailors learned to track time using the rising and setting of constellations. If a certain star climbed above the mast at a certain hour, you'd know it was time to change the watch. If a particular pattern vanished behind the sails, you'd know dawn was near. This wasn't stargazing, it was clockwork. And while it sounds romantic now, back then, it was simply survival. The stars were reliable when clouds weren't around, and unlike the sandglass or the stew pot, they didn't get knocked over in a storm. A sailor beside you lights a dim lantern and holds it close to a chart, not a map, but a star map. Hand-drawn, worn at the edges, it's barely more than dots and notes scrawled in fading ink. But to him it's sacred. He points to a dot and says, "When she hits the top of the mast, we're halfway through the second watch." You raise an eyebrow, not because you doubt him, but because somehow it feels right. There's even a tradition among older sailors to name their own time stars. Less known ones that only they used. A kind of personal sky clock. Some claimed it helped them sleep better, knowing exactly when the gold-toothed star would pass by the galley chimney. Of course, not all sailors agreed. Some preferred more tactile methods. Bells, knots, stew. Others trusted the stars above all. And to this day, historians still puzzle over how precise these stargazing sailors really were. Did they memorize full night sky calendars? Or were they just guessing, wrapped in salty confidence? The truth is likely somewhere in between. But what matters more is that it worked, enough to keep ships sailing, watches rotating, and stories alive. The ship rocks gently as you lean back and stare upward. You can see it now. Orion rising, his belt angled just so. The same belt a sailor saw 500 years ago, from this very kind of deck, breathing the same kind of sea air. And for a moment time collapses. You're not a visitor on a medieval ship. You're part of its rhythm. You don't need a wristwatch. You just need to look up. Don't fall asleep standing there, someone chuckles behind you. We've still got 3 stars to go before the bell. You smile, your eyes heavy but heart light. Out here, the night doesn't pass. It sails. By the time the stars settle high above the sails, the ship has quieted. The clamour of ropes and shouted orders has faded into the rhythm of waves tapping the hull like lazy fingers. You pace softly near the galley chimney, where a thin thread of steam curls up and vanishes into the night. Somewhere nearby, a rat scurries by, but even it seems to move gently, in time with everything else. Then, from the shadows, glop, glop, glop. A heavy ladle hits a wooden bowl with a soggy thump. A sailor passes you with what looks like oatmeal, mushy peas, hard to say. But one thing is certain, it's mealtime again. And here's the strange thing, on these ships, the food schedule is just as important as the stars and bells when it comes to telling time. You find a quiet spot and sit cross-legged on the deck. Across from you, a sailor digs into his bowl like it's a gourmet feast. Hot peas again, he mumbles. Must be second watch stew. He doesn't check a clock. He doesn't need to. His stomach is the clock. Sailors in the medieval era used mealtimes as natural time markers. Breakfast, midday stew, and a meagre evening bite. These were more than just fuel. They were rituals that broke the long, timeless ocean into manageable, edible segments. Imagine living in a world where when is marked by texture, by the thinness of gruel or the chewiness of biscuit. If it's still crunchy, it's morning. If it's soft and sad, it's evening. If it's burnt, well, someone probably missed the last sandglass flip. The galley wasn't just the kitchen, it was the pulse of the ship's daily rhythm. The cook, often grumpy and powerful as a minor king, controlled more than food. He controlled morale. A stew 5 minutes too late could throw off an entire shift. Tempers fray. People mutter. Superstitions bloom. You watch now as the cook tosses a pinch of something green, maybe herbs, maybe seaweed, into the pot. No timer, no thermometer, just instinct. He stirs it 3 times, tastes with a spoon carved from bone, and nods. Right on time. And this is where it gets even stranger. Some ships had such regular meal times that you could tell what hour it was just by the smell wafting from the galley chimney. A whiff of dry salted pork. That's the 4th hour of the day. Lentil mash with garlic. Midnight approaching. If the pot smells like burning wood, someone probably fell asleep on duty. You think it's silly until your stomach starts growling on schedule. It's contagious, this rhythm. A sailor shuffles over and offers you a small chunk of ship's biscuit. It's harder than expected, more stone than bread, and when you bite down it nearly cracks your tooth. Still good, he says proudly. Only a week old. Despite your doubts, you chew, slowly, carefully, and you realize that even the texture of food becomes a form of timekeeping. Fresh bread? You're near port, biscuit with weevils. You're at sea, long enough to miss land, but not long enough to cry about it. Biscuit so dry it becomes dust, you're dangerously overdue. Some ships even had rotating stew pots, not in terms of flavour, mind you, but literally. The same stew added to daily, never fully emptied. New ingredients tossed in each day, old ones scooped out with the ladle. It was an eternal bubbling calendar. Sailors joked that you could tell how long you'd been at sea by the colour of the broth. Historians still argue over whether these mealtime schedules were enforced strictly or loosely. Some claim they were the backbone of discipline at sea. Others suggest meals were made when convenient, especially during rough weather. But one thing is clear. Food told time in a way that no shadow or bell ever could. It was personal, physical, impossible to ignore. You lean back now, the taste of stale biscuit lingering on your tongue. Around you the ship hums with low voices and the occasional spoon clink. It feels warm here, despite the cold sea air, like you've all agreed to pause time together, to exist in this shared bubble of broth and bread, floating in the dark. And though you have no idea what hour it is, your body knows. It knows that stew means halfway through your night, that this stillness means the changing of the watch is near, that you're exactly where you're supposed to be. You close your eyes for a moment, you can hear the stew bubbling, feel the ship sway, taste the salt still clinging to the air. And for once you don't want to know what time it is, you just want to feel it pass. The warmth of the galley fades as you step back onto the deck, now slick with night mist. The wind has died down, leaving only the quiet groan of wood and the rhythmic lap of waves against the hull. It's the kind of silence that feels thick, like it's pressing against your ears. You glance around. Only a few figures remain topside. One leans on the tiller, eyes half closed. Another stares out at the stars. No one speaks. You've entered the quietest stretch of the day, the middle watch, midnight to 4 a.m. This is when the world seems to pause. And you are starting to feel it too. That strange sensation of time softening, as though it's no longer ticking forward, but instead rocking gently, back and forth, like the ship beneath your feet. You blink hard, struggling to stay alert, but your body is betraying you. This is when it's hardest to keep your eyes open. And yet the sailors on duty remain upright, barely. One paces slowly, the soles of his boots whispering across the deck. Another sits propped against a barrel, eyelids fluttering in slow battle with sleep. Welcome to watch duty in the dead of night. Medieval ships divided the day into watches, and each sailor was assigned a rotation. There were typically 7 or 8 watches in a 24-hour cycle, and being on the midnight shift was, well, let's just say it was rarely anyone's favourite. The sea at night is a different creature, vast, unknowable, and absolutely unwilling to entertain your sleep-deprived nonsense. You perch near the railing, where one sailor is rubbing his face with cold seawater. "Keeps me awake," he says, not even looking at you. That and counting gulls in the dark. Never see any, but it gives the eyes something to do. Another hums to himself. Off-key, soft, repetitive. It's not a song so much as a chant, a rhythm. You realize they all have little tricks like this, rituals to stay conscious. Some chew old rope ends, others pace in patterns. One is tapping the hilt of his knife with a spoon in 4/4 time. It's oddly beautiful, like a strange sleepless ballet. And it has to be this way, because the ocean doesn't stop at night. Storms can hit, ships can drift, fires can start, rats can chew through ropes, and worst of all, lanterns can go out. There's one now, swinging gently from the mast, its flame no bigger than a candle stub. It's a guiding light, not for seeing, but for knowing someone is still watching. You stare at it, mesmerized, and almost don't notice the sailor beside you mumbling. 3 bells soon. His voice is flat, hollowed out by hours of quiet. He doesn't look at a clock. He doesn't look at the sky. He just knows. And that's when it hits you. The body keeps time too. After enough nights on watch, your body learns. It starts waking up before your shift. It starts dragging you down when it's time to sleep, no matter what you're doing. You could be standing in a storm, waist deep in sea foam, and your knees would still buckle right on cue. Some sailors even claim they could wake themselves to the exact minute by sheer will. One legend tells of a first mate who could nap standing up and jolt awake at the precise moment the bell rang. Others say he just had good ears. Historians still argue whether this was possible or if it was just sailor storytelling at its finest. The minutes stretch now. The world is dark. The kind of darkness that makes you feel alone even in a crowd. But here on this ship, you are not alone. Everyone is tired. Everyone is floating through the same blurry version of midnight. There's a sudden sound. Clang, clang, clang. 3 bells. A new sailor climbs onto deck, his hair wild with sleep. He yawns so wide it looks painful, then stumbles toward the ropes. His shift has begun. Yours, apparently, has not ended. No one tells him the time. He knows by the bells, by the way the air feels, by the slump in the shoulders of the man he's replacing. You take a deep breath, the sea air cold in your lungs. You're still awake, you're still here, and somehow that means something. Because the middle watch isn't about staying sharp, it's about staying present. Even when your mind drifts, even when your legs ache, even when your only companion is the gentle creak of the mast and the distant splash of waves. This too is time. This too is how we measure the night. The wind rises without warning. You're midway through a yawn when the first gust slaps the sails and jolts the rigging to life. A second later, the ship lurches. Not hard, yet, but with the ominous energy of something big deciding it's had enough sleep. Around you the crew stirs. Sleepy heads snap up. Lanterns sway and cast distorted shadows along the deck. Ropes groan, timbers protest. You grip the railing, and for the first time tonight, time begins to feel fast again. Because when a storm approaches, time no longer drips like candle wax. It sprints. Orders are called out. Sails are reefed. Buckets are moved. Barrels secured. And you're suddenly in the middle of organised chaos, where everyone seems to know their role and none of it includes panicking. But here's the thing, even now as the sky darkens and the sea begins to rise, no one checks a clock. No one shouts the hour. Time in a storm is measured differently. It's measured in wind shifts, in wave intervals, in the way the bow slices through the water, or fails to. One sailor glances up at the sky and mutters, "She's an early riser tonight." You assume he means the storm, but no one stops to explain. That's how it goes. The sea doesn't give you time, it takes it. And during storms, all the sailors' carefully built timekeeping systems, shadows, stars, bells, become practically useless. You can't see the sky, you can't hear the bells, you can't feel the subtle shifts in temperature or watch the sandglass without getting tossed across the deck. So instead, sailors relied on instinct and the pacing of the storm itself. There's an old rule: count the seconds between lightning and thunder, not just for distance, but as a gauge of how long you've been inside the storm. It's no hourglass, but when your body's rattling with each thunderclap, you remember time by the beat of your heart. And then there's the helm. You move toward it now, following a sailor who's already soaked from the salt spray. The helmsman has the wheel gripped tight, his feet planted wide, teeth clenched. He doesn't ask the time, he feels the time. Every movement of the ship beneath him is a tick. Every tug of the sail above him is a talk. In the chaos of a storm, watch changes are forgotten. The stew goes cold, the bells don't ring, no one flips the sandglass. Everything pauses except the ship, which seems more alive than ever. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you recall that storms often came before dawn. Sailors even had a name for it, the black hour. It was the last stretch of night when exhaustion was deepest and nerves were thinnest. And of course, that's when the wind would choose to rise. Some historians believe these black hour storms were exaggerated in sailor lore. But even today, seasoned mariners will tell you, the worst squalls come when you're most tired. You duck beneath a low beam as a wave crashes over the side. Your boots are soaked. Your cloak slaps against your legs. A sailor laughs, not joyfully but like someone who's already accepted that wet boots are his destiny. "You feel it?" he shouts over the wind. "The storm's been creeping up for hours. Even the rats knew it. Not a sound all night from the bilge." Wait, what? Yes, apparently rats were unofficial timekeepers too. When they went quiet, sailors knew something was coming. Their silence wasn't golden, it was prophetic. Another flash of lightning cracks the sky open. You count 1, 2, 3, then the thunder roars, close, too close. And yet there's calm within it all. Not peace exactly, but something familiar, predictable, a strange comfort in the chaos. because for medieval sailors, storms were a kind of clock reset. They reminded you that time didn't belong to humans, it belonged to the sea. And when the sea decided to rearrange things, your schedule, your stew, your watch, your bell meant nothing. The rain finally begins, sharp and icy. The deck gleams silver under each lightning flash. But the crew keeps moving, one task to the next, not watching the sky for the hour, watching it for rhythm. A pause in the wind, a lull in the thunder, a shift in the spray. These were your moments. These were your minutes. And when the storm finally passed, and it always did, time would begin again. Slowly, quietly, with a single breath, a footstep, a bell. But for now you are inside the storm. Time is water, and you are floating inside it. Morning doesn't so much arrive as it seeps in, like light spilled from a cracked jar. You're slumped against a crate, soaked to the bone, hair plastered to your forehead, and unsure whether you've just survived a storm or been gently chewed up and spat out by it. Either way, the sky is no longer black. It's a murky, pale grey, tinged with the first hints of gold. And with that subtle change in light, the rhythm of the ship resumes, as if the chaos of the past few hours had never happened. You hear it first, the faint clang of the bell, a cautious, testing sort of chime. One ring, pause, 2 rings. The cook shouts something about burnt beans. The logline is uncoiled again. A sailor hums off-key while swabbing the deck. It's almost as if the storm didn't press pause. It just fast-forwarded. And now everything snaps back into place. But there's one strange thing you can't stop thinking about. During the worst of the wind and waves, you completely lost track of time. You couldn't have told someone whether an hour had passed or 5 minutes. You'd forgotten the watches, the bells, the knots. Even the stars were gone. What was left? Just the ship, the creaking, the motion, the way the ropes trembled in your hand like tired animals. You realize now why the sailors trust their senses more than tools. Because in the middle of a storm, tools fall apart. But the ship speaks. You just have to learn the language. You watch now as the sun finally pushes through a slit in the clouds. It catches on the wet deck, casting long glistening shadows. And with those shadows, you know the time again. A sailor points to the shadow of the mast hitting a faded black mark on the planks. "Aye, mornin'," he says. "Roughly 6 bells if the cook's on schedule." You glance toward the galley chimney and, like clockwork, see steam rising, a thin column curling in the cool air, the kind that usually means pea mash. Again. Another sailor grunts, "A storm like that? Should have been late morning by now, but she came early. That'll throw the whole day off." And you suddenly realize how time bends out here. It's flexible, fluid. Storms make it stretch. Fog makes it shrink. Sometimes a single watch feels like a week. Other times you blink and 3 shifts have passed. And no clock, not even the fanciest one, can explain that feeling. Some sailors mark time in their own way. They notch beams, scratch days into the mast. One even keeps a shell in his pocket. Every morning he rubs it once for luck. That's how he knows he's survived another night. There's even talk of the time-lost ships, those that sailed into strange fogs and emerged days later with no memory of what happened. Sailors claimed the clocks inside them were all wrong. Sandglasses, frozen mid-flow, stew half-cooked yet cold. Did time stop? Or did it just go somewhere else for a while? Historians, of course, roll their eyes. But those who've spent long nights at sea know better. Time isn't just measured in minutes, it's measured in moments, in how you feel when the storm breaks, in how the deck sighs beneath your boots, in the exact golden way the sunlight hits the railing and makes the salt crystals sparkle like diamonds. You lean forward now, tracing a finger along a damp knot in the deck. It's swollen from last night's rain, warped slightly by years of tides. And still, it holds. Just like the ship. Just like you. Storm's past, says a sailor emerging from below deck with a bucket in one hand and a smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes. Days back on track. And it is, kind of. The bells resume, the sandglass turns, the stew simmers, and the rats return, scratching around like time never skipped a beat. But you remember. There was a space where time slipped, where watches meant nothing, where even the stars blinked and looked away. And somehow, that made everything feel more real. You stand, stretch your aching arms, and take in the new day. Fog lifting, sails drying, sailors grumbling softly about sore backs and wet socks. Time has returned. But you're not looking at a clock. You're watching the sun inch across the mast, and you know, deep down, you're already halfway through the watch. You're standing near the galley again, drawn not by hunger, but by the strange, deliberate ritual unfolding in front of you. A sailor crouches over a stubby candle wedged carefully inside a small wooden box. It's burning slowly, wax pooling at the base. But that's not what catches your attention. It's the line of nails hammered into the side of the box, equally spaced, each one blackened at the tip. The sailor leans close, watches the flame creep downward, then checks the alignment of the melting wax with the next nail. Just about third nail's mark, he mutters, sounding satisfied. Almost halfway to bells. You've just witnessed one of the stranger and lesser-known tools of maritime timekeeping. The smoker's candle, also known as the sailor's candle clock. In a world where shadow watching and stargazing only worked when nature cooperated, sailors turned to controlled combustion as an alternative. These candles were handcrafted, often from beeswax or animal fat, poured into a container with metal pins or notches placed at regular intervals. As the wax burned down, each marker would fall or become visible, indicating a unit of time had passed. And if you thought sandglasses were low-tech, just wait until you hear this. Some candles were even infused with threads, soaked in different herbs or oils, creating different smells at different stages of burning. That way you could literally smell what hour it was. Another sailor chuckles as he passes by. Had one once that smelled like me aunt's boots when it hit midnight. You're not sure what that means. You're also not sure you want to know. But the concept is oddly brilliant. Candles burn at a consistent rate, as long as the wind stays out and the wick behaves. On calmer nights, sailors used them to mark time between bells or to measure cooking durations. 2 nails till the oats are done, someone might say. And if the candle burned too quickly, either the wax was impure or the cook was lying. You crouch beside the box and watch. The flame flutters, bending slightly with the wind but still burning steady. It's like a miniature lighthouse, keeping time just for you. The sailor explains that some captains had their own private candle clocks, kept in sheltered corners of their quarters, shielded from prying eyes. Others made communal ones, set up near the mast where everyone could glance and estimate how much of the shift was left. And if you were clever, you might calibrate your candle to the exact burn rate of the ship's bell cycle. That way, even if the bell ringer was asleep, or had tumbled down a ladder, you'd still know when to swap the watch. Of course, not every candle clock was perfect. If the ship listed hard to starboard, the wax would pool unevenly. A sudden gust could snuff it out. Or worse, someone might knock it over, turning time into a small smoky fire hazard. Still, in a world of ropes and stars, this humble candle provided something uniquely comforting, a visible passage of time. You could see the wax melting. you could see the nail approaching. It gave you something to focus on, something to wait for, something solid in the midst of the swaying uncertainty. Some historians debate whether candle clocks were common on all ships or just a quirky invention of smaller merchant vessels. There's little documentation. But sailors being sailors, it's likely that anything which could mark time and didn't involve getting wet was cherished and reused. And sometimes improved. There are whispers of captains who fashioned double-wick candles, one wick on each end, so the two flames would meet in the middle. The moment they touched, shift over. Or maybe it was just a race to see which end burned faster. You stand again, stretching stiff joints, and glance toward the horizon. The fog has burned off. The sky is a soft blue-grey, mottled with the remnants of dawn clouds. You're not sure what time it is exactly, but you can feel it. The ship has settled into its rhythm again. The bell will ring soon, the stew will bubble, the sail will groan. But for now you watch the candle, the wax dips slowly. The flame wavers. Another nail glimmers through the melting layer. Time reduced to a flickering light and the slow surrender of wax. And somehow it's enough. You're back on deck now, the sun higher in the sky, casting warm, buttery light across the planks. The sea is gentle, almost lazy, and the ship moves with a long, rolling rhythm that makes your legs sway without thinking. It's quiet, too quiet, until someone near the rigging mutters, "Well, that shadow's late." You turn. 3 sailors are clustered near the mainmast, squinting at the thick, dark shadow it casts across the deck. They're not admiring the view. They're watching the mast like a clock. One taps the deck with his boot. It's off. At this hour it should fall near the hatch ring, not the water barrel. The others nod, frowning as if time itself has let them down. You've already seen shadows used as improvised sundials, but what you're seeing now goes deeper. This isn't just watching the sun's angle. They've mapped the entire ship around its daily pattern. They call it the deck dial. Every ship is different. Length, beam, rigging, layout. So each vessel develops its own shadow-based timekeeping system. And over weeks and months, crews memorize how the sun behaves on their ship. At high noon, the mast's shadow might line up perfectly with a specific seam in the planks. At third bell, it might slice through a coil of rope, and so on. It's like a ship-sized sundial, except it only works if the skies are clear and the ship is steady, which on the open ocean is like saying it only works on Tuesdays during a solar eclipse. Still, when it works, it's beautiful. One sailor scratches a faint notch into the wood with the tip of a blade. Another ties a strip of frayed cloth around a beam. These are memory markers, tiny signposts in a sea of sameness. "Shadow hit here on the third watch," someone whispers, almost reverently. It's not superstition, it's data. Of course, this method has its critics. Even in medieval times, some captains dismissed shadow watching as fancy guesswork. But crews trusted it more than the captain's guesswork, especially if the stew came out late. There's something deeply human about it, turning something ephemeral into something fixed, tracing sunlight across wood, watching a ship's shadow age like a sundial tattooed on moving skin. You squint now and try to see it for yourself. The mast's shadow is long, stretched to the port side. It kisses the edge of a hatch cover, and you hear a sailor murmur, "Third bell's ghost, nearly noon." You ask him what that means. He grins. Means it's almost lunch, but not quite. Means we're halfway to the end of this shift, but not enough to get lazy. Another sailor joins in. Means you've got just long enough to pretend you're working before the bell rings and someone yells at you. Bam. They laugh quietly. You do too? But underneath the jokes, it's clear. This shadow is more than a shape, it's a promise. A signal that the day is moving forward. That even in the vastness of the sea where every direction looks the same, you can still find your place in time. You're reminded of something one of the older sailors said last night, when he pointed to the stars and whispered, "They move, so we know we're not stuck." The same goes for the shadow. You walk across the deck, following the dark slash it paints on the wood. It feels like walking across a sundial, like stepping through someone else's version of a clock. The boards are warm beneath your feet. The light hums, and for a moment you stop thinking in hours or minutes. You just think in shadows. Some historians claim the deck dial was a myth, romanticized by poets and novelists. But sailors swear by it. "Saved my skin more than once," one says. "When the bell failed and the sand ran out and the sky went blank, the shadow stayed." You stand still as the shadow creeps past your foot, silent and sure. Time doesn't always tick. Sometimes it drifts, and sometimes it leans against a mast and waits for you to notice. The wind is up again, not angry this time, just brisk, insistent. It tugs at the sails and whips loose strands of your hair across your face. The ship groans slightly as it adjusts to the change. You feel the shift before anyone says a word. And then someone does. "Feels like we're edging toward third watch weather," a sailor murmurs, tying off a rope with practiced ease. You glance around, nothing has changed visibly, but you sense it too. The ropes are tighter, the air crisper. The deck feels different. Not by sight, not by clock, but by touch. You kneel near a coil of rope and press your fingers into the fibers. It's damp, not soaked, not dry, but something in between. A subtle slickness that clings to your skin, cool and familiar. And now you understand what they mean when they say the ropes grow wet. Because this too is how sailors once told time. In the days before barometers and waterproof watches, seafarers learned to read moisture, especially in the ship's ropes. Hemp, the most common rope material, is like a sponge, soaking up atmospheric humidity in minutes. And the more experienced hands could tell, by feel alone, what time of day or night it was based on how slick the ropes had become. Crazy? Maybe. But also incredibly consistent. In the hour before dawn, the temperature dropped and moisture in the air condensed. Ropes grew heavier, damper. And for sailors too exhausted to look at the stars or count bells, this silent dampness became a signal. Mornings close. You run your hand along a thick line near the mainsail. It's cool and slightly sticky, as if it's been kissed by fog. A sailor beside you nods. Nearly sun-up, you can feel the change in the hemp. Is she chatter? There's an almost meditative quality to it, this quiet observation, no words, just the feel of rope, the weight of it, how it bends, how it creaks when pulled. The deck is quieter now, not from sleep but from attention. Every movement is measured. Someone checks a knot. Someone else adjusts a pulley, listening to how the rope whistles through the block. It's like the whole ship is waking up, but not all at once, gently. It's at this moment that you realize the ship is alive, not metaphorically, genuinely. It breathes, it stretches, it reacts. And sailors by necessity became its caretakers, not with clocks, but with their hands. Some captains kept journals recording rope behaviour. Mainline damp at fourth bell, one might write. Or bowline stiff at high tide, storm approaching. Historians have found these strange notations scattered through logbooks, often dismissed as irrelevant. But to sailors they were part of a language, a soft-spoken, tactile vocabulary of time. You wonder how long it would take you to master it. A week? A month? A lifetime? A younger sailor walks by, wiping his hands on his tunic. You'll start to feel it without thinking, if you stay aboard long enough, like your bones tell you the hour. You believe him. It makes sense now why some older sailors didn't like clocks. They weren't just unreliable, they were too detached, cold, mechanical. Meanwhile, the ropes talked, the deck sighed, the wind whispered. One sailor claims he once felt the rope go stiff right as the sun broke the horizon, before a single ray of light touched the sails. Didn't see the morning, he says, but I felt it right through the line. You press your palm to the rope again. It's still cool, damp, but lighter now. The kind of wet that's beginning to fade, and you know, without needing to look, that sunrise is only minutes away. Time, it turns out, is not always seen. Sometimes it's held, in calloused palms, between coarse fibres, in the memory of damp rope on cold mornings. And for a sailor, that's enough. The first light hits the sails like a whispered apology. After the dark storm, after the damp ropes and sleepless watches, sunrise arrives, not in a triumphant burst, but in a soft, golden sigh. You barely notice it at first, just a glow in the corner of your eye, just enough to make the salt crystals on the railing glint like crushed glass. You blink, and there it is, the edge of the sun, peeking up over the rolling horizon. The crew doesn't cheer. They don't even speak. They just glance toward the light, then return to their work, as if they'd been expecting it all along. And maybe they had. After all, they've been measuring its arrival all night, in knots, in candles, in damp ropes and vanishing stars. But there's something special about this moment. You step quietly to the bow, eyes fixed on the warm colours bleeding across the sky. Pinks, oranges, a touch of lavender. It's the kind of sunrise that would make a painter sigh and put down their brush. And out here, it means something more than beauty. It means time is resetting, it's a fresh day. And on some ships, that meant a peculiar tradition, waiting for the green flash. Now, before you laugh, it's real. Or at least sailors insisted it was. A split-second burst of green light seen just as the sun dipped below, or rose above, the horizon. Most people never saw it, but those who did swore it meant something. Luck, safe passage, a sign that time itself had paused and restarted with your ship at its centre. You scan the sky now, hoping, half expecting some mythical sparkle of emerald. But it doesn't come. Just a smooth golden curve rising steadily over the sea. Still, you're not disappointed. The light is enough. Because with it, the ship's entire rhythm shifts. Lanterns are snuffed. The cook begins banging pots again. You hear a few soft curses as sailors roll sore shoulders and rub the sleep from their eyes. The watch changes silently, like dancers trading places between acts. No fanfare, no applause, just routine. A sailor beside you nods toward the sun and mutters, "Right on time." Right on what time, you wonder? There's no wristwatch, no bell, no hourglass in sight. But then you remember, the rope was dry, the mast shadow had curled to the starboard, the stew had boiled just after the third bell, the stars had faded in the correct order, and now the sun rises exactly when it should. Some sailors kept journals tracking sunrise. Sun breached at third bell and 2 rope lengths, one wrote. Another simply marked a small X each day, then counted how many between ports. This too was a clock of sorts. Crude, personal, honest. Of course, historians argue about the green flash. Was it real? Optical illusion? Seawater mirage? The truth is, most sailors didn't care. It was the idea that mattered, that for one breathless second the sky recognized their journey and lit it up in colour. A reward. A reset. A sailor behind you grunts and shuffles past with a bundle of dry rope over his shoulder. "No green today," he says, voice low, "but we'll take gold just the same." You watch the sun rise higher, feel its warmth start to eat away at the cold in your bones. The deck glows, the sails catch a breeze that smells faintly of citrus and salt. You swear for a moment the ship is smiling. This is the start of a new day. But more than that, it's a signal. The subtle, universal, irreplaceable tick of nature's clock. Not mechanical, not digital, just light, just time, folded into colour. And as it washes over the sea, you realise you're right on time too. The sun is fully up now, casting long golden stripes across the deck like nature's version of stained glass. The sea is calm, almost unnervingly so. Gulls trace lazy arcs in the sky, and below them the ship slides forward with barely a sound. Everything has slowed. You're in what sailors sometimes called the watch of silence, that strange window between the first meal and the next task, when the world hasn't quite decided what to do with itself. There's no shouting, no bells, no commotion, just the rustle of sails, the soft creak of rope, and the occasional distant cough. A sailor snoozes in a shadow. Another sits cross-legged, mending a shirt with thread so fine it might have been plucked from a spider. It's not idleness, it's waiting. And in this lull, time behaves differently. It stretches, it wanders, it lets you drift. You sit near the railing, watching the horizon. Nothing moves quickly. A cloud takes its time rolling past. A line of seaweed trails in the wake. Even your own thoughts seem to be trudging through molasses. This was one of the oddest and most consistent measures of time at sea, the feeling of slowness. After a flurry of activity, storm prep, bell rings, shifts, the body becomes hyper-aware of its own stillness. The pause between movements becomes a sort of temporal mile marker. You don't measure minutes, you measure gaps. The space between moments becomes the unit. You begin to notice it too. The lull has a texture, a shape, the way the sail flaps just once every so often, the way the wood creaks less, the way the rats in the hold go quiet, as if even they can't be bothered. Some sailors describe this period as the hollow hour, the time when you weren't on duty, but also not truly off. You weren't hungry, but you weren't full. You weren't tired, but you weren't rested. You just were. One sailor nearby twirls a coin across his knuckles, over and over, not for luck, not for distraction, but to feel the passing of time in something small and controlled. The click of metal against skin is his metronome. Another slices thin curls of wood off a block, one by one, letting them fall in a neat spiral pile beside him. It's not a task, it's a clock. Because when the sea is calm and the sun is up and the stew is still an hour off, people make their own clocks. Fidgeting, pacing, whittling, humming, tapping fingers in repetitive beats that mimic heartbeats or waves. You catch yourself doing it too, rhythmically tracing the seam of the deck with your finger, not on purpose, just because. And while no one says it aloud, everyone here is aware of it. That peculiar elasticity of time, the way 5 minutes can feel like an hour if there's no bell, the way you can nod off, wake up, and feel like no time has passed at all. Historians call this temporal drift, the brain's quiet rebellion against monotony. Sailors simply called it the float. It wasn't bad or good. It was just what happened. Time drifted and so did you. Sometimes this silence would stretch too long, and a sailor would snap out of it with a shout or a song. Not to entertain, just to restart the clock, to pull everyone back into rhythm. You hear it now. A voice at the far end of the ship, not singing exactly, but chanting. A low, tuneless string of nonsense syllables, one word repeated over and over. It's not for you, it's not for anyone, it's just there, a placeholder for time. And gradually you realize the lull is ending. Someone stands. Another adjusts the sail. A creak becomes a step becomes a shuffle becomes motion. The hollow hour closes, folded back into routine. You stand too, limbs sluggish but compliant. The air feels warmer, the sky brighter, the stew smells stronger. The ship has shifted, and with it time has begun again. But for a while you floated. You forgot the bells, the ropes, the watches. You were just here, inside the quiet. And sometimes that's the truest time of all. The sun has now climbed high enough to warm the backs of your shoulders, drawing sweat where seawater once sat cold. The wind hums gently through the sails, and the ship cuts a clean path across a silvery stretch of sea that looks like molten pewter. There's movement on deck again, slow, measured, purposeful. But something is different. Sailors glance toward the horizon more frequently now, not worried, not expectant, just watchful. You follow their gaze but see only the same endless ocean. And then one sailor taps your arm and nods toward the far edge of the sky. "There it is," he says softly. "Might catch it today." You squint, you see nothing, just sun, sea, clouds. But the others are watching with subtle anticipation. They lean on railings, shade their eyes, wait without speaking. Then someone mutters, half to himself, "She'll flash green if she's in the mood." Ah, the green flash. They're waiting for it again. You thought it was just a sunrise thing. But no, sunset brings its own quiet superstition. More common, more vivid, still elusive. The green flash is a fleeting moment, 1 second, maybe less, when the sun, just as it dips below the horizon, flashes emerald. Most sailors never see it. Some claim they see it often. And a few say if you do catch it, it means something. Good luck, safe passage, maybe even a soul leaving the sea. You ask a nearby sailor if he's ever seen it. He shrugs. Once, maybe, hard to say. Could have been wishful thinking, or fish oil in my eye. But still he watches, because out here, when the days are long and the nights are longer, you start to hope time might occasionally shimmer, that the ordinary might give way to the extraordinary, just for a breath. The ship continues its slow, steady pace westward, chasing the sun. Shadows stretch across the deck like lazy cats. The rope you touched earlier is dry now, sun-warmed and slightly stiff. The candle clock has been packed away. The sandglass flipped for what must be the 30th time. And yet, none of that matters right now. All eyes are on the edge of time. And you realize sunset is more than a change in light. For these sailors, it's a ceremony, a soft-spoken reckoning. The official end of one ship's day and the beginning of another, even if the watch hasn't changed, even if the stew is still cooking. One sailor slowly peels a boiled egg, as if delaying the bite might somehow summon the flash. Another quietly polishes a brass buckle, more out of nervous habit than necessity. And you stand with them, leaning on the rail, eyes stinging slightly from salt and sun. The horizon flattens, the sun hangs low. Everything, every breath, every creak of the ship, every seagull call seems to pause. Then for a single second the light changes, a blink of colour, a hint of green. Maybe. Maybe not. It's gone. The sailors don't cheer, they don't react, They just glance at one another and offer a shared knowing look. Could have been it, someone whispers, wasn't nothing. Someone else says, even if it wasn't, it's close enough. And that's enough. Because the green flash isn't about science or confirmation. It's about possibility. A moment that can't be timed. That ignores clocks and bells and knots. That arrives only when it pleases and disappears before anyone can agree on what they saw. And still, it's marked. It's remembered. It's part of the sailor's calendar. As the last sliver of sun vanishes, the ship exhales. Ropes relax, boots shuffle, the stew pot is stirred. The cycle resumes. But something inside you lingers in that second, the second when time didn't tick. It sparked. And for sailors, that's time too. Not just measured in minutes, but in moments you'll chase again. The sun is gone now, swallowed by the sea, leaving a faint orange glow behind like the last warm breath of a campfire. The sky deepens from blue to indigo, then to velvet black, and above you the stars begin to reappear, familiar, flickering, ancient. You're standing midship, the sails above you rustling like great wings, and the ropes, earlier warm and stiff, now slowly drink the damp back into their fibres. You reach out and touch one, feeling the return of the cool night grip. It's like the ship itself is inhaling, settling in for another long stretch of ocean breathing. But not everyone is relaxing. You see a lantern flicker to life near the captain's quarters, then another. 2 sailors pass quietly by, carrying a box between them. A third joins with a soft thunk of boots on wood. They're not hurrying, but they're focused, intent. Something's being unpacked, something delicate. You move closer, and in the low glow of oil light, you catch a glimpse, a brass object tucked carefully into a padded box. It's small, round, intricate. You blink, unsure. But then you hear the whisper, the captain's clock. So it's true, you'd heard the rumours, that some captains, wealthy, powerful, secretive, travelled with personal mechanical clocks, tucked away in their cabins like forbidden treasure, not for the crew, not for watches, just for themselves. Because out here, mechanical clocks were both miracle and liability. They were rare, expensive, fragile, and worse, they weren't reliable. The rocking of the ship, the shifts in humidity, the salty air, all of it wreaked havoc on gears and springs. A clock might work perfectly on land, then lose 10 minutes a day at sea, or gain 15, or just stop entirely and refuse to explain itself. But still, captains brought them. Why? Not to keep better time, but to keep private time. The sailor beside you glances at the brass device, now ticking faintly on a small shelf. He doesn't trust the bell, he mutters, thinks the watch hand flips it too late, so he keeps his own rhythm. There's something oddly human about that. In a world of rope, shadows, stars, and stew, some part of you still wants to own the hour, to name it, to put your stamp on it, even if everyone else disagrees. You watch as the captain enters, glances at the ticking brass, and nods without a word. Then he shuts the cabin door. And just like that, time becomes 2 things at once. Outside, on deck. Time is fluid. It's shadows and bells and the colour of soup. Inside that cabin, it's measured in ticks. Predictable, cold, private. You turn back toward the sea. The stars are brighter now, clustered thick above the mast. The sailors nearby aren't watching the clock. They're watching the sky. One traces a constellation with his finger. Another hums a familiar tune, a soft lullaby for no one in particular. And for the crew, time still belongs to the wind, to the slosh of water, to the groan of wood and the weight of hemp. Some historians wonder why more ships didn't carry mechanical clocks. The truth? They weren't helpful. Too fussy, too proud. Too slow to adapt to the rhythm of the sea. The sailors didn't need perfection. They needed consistency. And that came from feeling the ship sway. From watching how the lanterns swayed at third bell. From knowing stew boils slightly faster on warmer tides. Even now, the idea of owning time seems wrong. Here, time isn't owned, it's shared like a loaf of stale bread or a bucket of bilge water. You look one last time toward the captain's cabin. Tick, tick, tick. Then back to the stars. Silence. Peace. And you understand now. The most accurate clock at sea is not the one that ticks. It's the one that listens. The moon is up now, pale and full, casting a silver sheen across the sea that makes everything look like it's been dusted in powdered sugar. The water glows. The sails glow. Even the rats skittering along the lower beams seem to glisten like living moonlight. It's beautiful. And somehow it's on schedule. You glance around, no one seems surprised by the moon's arrival, no one gasps at its timing, but you notice the subtle cues. A sailor checking the shine on the brass rail, another pulling a blanket tighter around his shoulders. A third squints at the shadows it casts and says, "She's early tonight." They're not being poetic, they're being practical. Because moonlight, as it turns out, was another tool for telling time, especially in long dark nights where stars were scattered and clouds were fickle. While the moon isn't reliable in the same way the sun is, it rises at different times each night, waxes and wanes unpredictably, it still had a rhythm. And that rhythm, once memorized, was as dependable to seasoned sailors as any rope or bell. You sit near the mast, watching as moonlight casts a long shadow across the deck. A sailor approaches with a small polished shell in hand. He holds it up, letting the moonlight reflect inside it like a miniature lantern. You raise an eyebrow. "Lunar marker," he says with a smirk. "The inside's smooth. When it catches full, I know we're 3 hours from watch change." You're not sure if he's serious, but the glint in his eye suggests he's at least half serious, which out here might be more accurate than most timepieces. And honestly, it works. Because moonlight behaves in patterns if you're patient enough to notice. The way it hits the deck at different hours. The way it reflects on water. The way it fades slightly before sunrise, giving seasoned sailors a quiet nudge to ready the deck for dawn. You close your eyes and listen. The ship groans gently underfoot. The sail flaps once. A gull cries, somewhere far off. And then there's a tiny scratching noise. You open your eyes and spot something curious. A rat. It's near the galley hatch, just nibbling on something unidentifiable. But what stands out isn't the rat, it's the timing. You've heard the crew talk about this. The rats keep the best time, someone once said. They know the bell before it rings. At first you thought it was a joke, but now in the quiet of the moonlit deck you realise they might have meant it. Because the rats stir at the same hours every night. They know when the food scraps appear, when the footsteps stop, when the lanterns dim. Their scurrying becomes a kind of nocturnal metronome, a soft rhythm beneath the rhythm. And sure enough, moments later you hear the distant bell ring, 4 times, clean and even. The rat pauses, sniffs the air, and disappears back into the dark, as if acknowledging its shift is over. You smile. Only at sea could the passage of time be marked by moonlight and vermin. One sailor stretches and says, "That's 4 bells, mid-watch halfway done." Then he closes his eyes and leans back against a barrel like he's just completed a task more sacred than any clockwork. And in a way he has. Because when you live without clocks, you learn to notice, to feel time in your body, to hear it in footsteps, to smell it in the air, to sense it in the moon. Some historians dismiss these methods as superstition. They prefer their quartz and springs and digital seconds. But anyone who's spent a night at sea under a full moon will tell you, time can glow. It can squeak. It can sigh in the wind and shift in the waves. And if you listen closely enough, it'll speak to you in ways no ticking hand ever could. Dawn is still a long way off, but something is changing. It's not the temperature. It's still cool and damp with the hush of early morning. It's not the light. The moon still hangs like a silver coin nailed to the sky. And it's not the ship, which rocks gently, predictably, like it's been doing since time began. No, the change is subtler. It's in the voices. You hear them now, fewer than before, softer than before. The chatter has dulled into murmurs. Boots no longer thud against the planks. They shuffle. Even the occasional cough is swallowed by the stillness. This is the final stretch of the middle watch, and it's when the edge of exhaustion sets in. Sailors call it the grey watch, or sometimes more bitterly, the stupid hour. Not because anyone's foolish, but because even the smartest sailor struggles to stay sharp when the night stretches too long. You feel it too. Your eyes sting. Your body's not cold, but it's too tired to get warm. Your limbs feel heavy and every movement seems slightly behind your intention. Time no longer ticks. It droops, like the ends of your coat sleeves, like your shoulders. A sailor nearby slaps his own cheek gently. Another is pacing, counting every sixth step out loud. One hums under his breath, not for the tune, but for the rhythm. They're trying to hold on. Because the final hour before dawn is when the mind starts to wander, sometimes gently, sometimes dangerously. Sailors have been known to hallucinate during this hour, to forget what task they were doing, to nod off mid-step and tumble into barrels or worse, into the sea. That's why captains sometimes schedule extra rotations or pair younger sailors with older ones near the end of the watch, just in case time starts to unravel. And yet, this hour is also strangely beautiful. Because the silence deepens, not into emptiness but into intimacy, you notice things now you didn't see before. The way the oil in the lantern floats like liquid gold just before it flickers. The way the rope near the helm has begun to steam faintly as the dew begins to lift. The way the stars near the eastern edge of the sky are just starting to pale, just barely, as if embarrassed by what's coming. One sailor whispers, "It's close." He means dawn. But he doesn't point, he just feels it. Another scratches behind his ear and mutters, "Rats are too quiet, they know." You almost laugh, except you realize he's right. There's not a squeak, not a scratch. The rats have gone still like everything else. Even the bell ringer hesitates. He holds the hammer in hand, waiting. Eyes narrowed at the horizon, because ringing too early would break the spell. And ringing too late, that would invite mutiny, or at least a galley full of cold stew. The sailors hold their breath, not out of fear, but ritual. The passing from night to day deserves a pause, an acknowledgement. A sacred second where the world is balanced, no longer night, not yet morning. And then, clang. One chime, then another, 6 bells. And just like that, the spell breaks. The cook opens the galley hatch. The ship's cat stretches. A lantern is snuffed. You swear the stars blink once and disappear. Historians have always struggled to quantify this hour. You won't find it in ship logs. You won't find it on official watch charts. But every sailor knows it. It's the hour when the world is both farthest from the sun and closest to remembering it exists. You look out at the horizon, still dark. but no longer endless. You've made it through the grey watch, and time, whatever it is out here, has kept going. The first blush of light creeps in from the east, so faint at first you think it's your imagination. But it's real. The sky lightens, not with colour, not yet, but with possibility. A softening of the black, a quiet lifting of the night. You exhale. You weren't holding your breath, but now you realise you were. And you're not alone. Around you the crew begins to stir, not with suddenness, but like old wooden doors opening slowly. One sailor yawns, long and without apology. Another stretches so wide you can hear his shoulder pop. Boots scuff the deck. Buckets clatter. And then it begins again. The routine. Ropes are coiled. Decks are swabbed. The stew is stirred again. The watch changes hands with barely a word. There's no ceremony, just the soft, well-worn rhythm of people who've done this 1,000 times before. But something's different today. A low murmur spreads among the crew, a gesture, a nod toward the captain's quarters. The lantern inside is lit earlier than usual. Then the door opens and out he comes, straight-backed, silent, holding something wrapped in cloth. He walks to the helm, places the object down gently and unwraps it. A clock. But not the delicate brass one from before. No, this one's different, bigger, older, rougher. It's wooden, boxy, with a heavy pendulum that ticks audibly in the morning hush. It's not elegant, it's not quiet, but it's here, and it's working. You hear the steady tick, 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 and it sends a ripple through your thoughts, because it's the first time you've heard that sound without doubt, without mist, without wind trying to drown it out. One sailor whispers, "Hasn't brought it out in weeks." Another nods, saves it for calm water, flat seas, first light. You move closer and watch the pendulum swing. Back and forth, back and forth. It's mesmerizing, but not hypnotic. Grounding. And that's when you realize something. This clock, this ugly, clunky, sea-worn thing, isn't about precision. It's not about knowing the exact hour. It's about starting over. Every morning the captain brings it out, winds it, lets it tick. Not because he trusts it more than the sun or the stars or the bells, but because he needs a beginning. A way to say, this is day. And sailors, whether they admit it or not, take comfort in it. Because all night long time is loose. It's soup, it's salt, it's wind and muscle and shadow. But at dawn you need something to grab. A moment, a marker, a tick. The captain's clock becomes that moment. You glance around, no one's watching the sun anymore. They're watching the clock. Just for a moment. Just long enough to reset their brains. To line up their inner ropes with something external. Something steady. Then the spell breaks. The bell rings. The deck groans. Someone drops a mug and curses softly. The rats return with their squeaks and skitters. And just like that, the day has started. Some historians argue that mechanical clocks only became reliable at sea in the late 18th century. But they miss the point. Out here, reliability isn't the same as purpose. The clock doesn't have to be accurate. It just has to be there. You step back, listening to its ticking as the sunlight begins to stretch across the deck. Not measuring time, but marking it. The ship breathes in, the sky brightens, the stew bubbles, and once again, without calendars, without wristwatches, without alarms, everyone knows what time it is. The ship moves forward, slow and steady, under a sky that's now fully awake. The gold of early morning has given way to a pale, washed-out blue, the kind of sky that promises nothing dramatic, No storm, no squall, no omen. Just a simple, ordinary day. And on this ship, an ordinary day is a small miracle. You walk along the deck, boots tapping in rhythm with the creak of wood. Sailors are already in motion, hoisting, tightening, folding, scrubbing. None of it frantic. It's all part of the dance. The morning watch is underway, and with it comes the comforting hum of repetition. But beneath the surface, something has shifted. You feel it in your chest, like a tide moving in slow motion. A realization, a soft one, like the weight of a warm blanket being placed on your shoulders. After everything, the bells, the ropes, the knots, the stew, the stars, the green flash, the moonlight, the silence, time still passed. And you were there to feel it. It didn't need to be measured precisely. It didn't need to be written down. You didn't need a number stamped on a screen, because time on this ship wasn't a countdown. It was a rhythm. And now, in the quiet of the early day, you feel that rhythm slowing, softening. Not because the ship is stopping, but because your story aboard is nearly done. You step once more past the galley, where the scent of beans and smoke still lingers. Past the mast, where the shadows now stretch in the opposite direction than they did the night before. You glance at the notch in the wood where the bell rope sways, at the fraying edge of the sandglass cradle, at the candle stub that never quite burned straight, and you feel it. Not nostalgia, not drama, just peace. Sailors pass by you, nodding. Some hum softly. Some whisper jokes under their breath. One gives you a knowing look and says, "Not bad for a night watch." You smile, because now you understand something you didn't at the start. Clocks are for counting. But sailors? They're for remembering. They remember the sound of wet rope at dawn, the angle of a shadow on the hatch, the way stew thickens at third bell, the exact rhythm of a rat's tiny footsteps at midnight, and the hush just before the green flash doesn't appear. Time for them isn't a destination. It's a companion, always present, sometimes playful, sometimes cruel, but never forgotten. And as you lean on the railing one last time, watching the water stretch endlessly in all directions, you don't feel like you've lost time out here. You feel like you've met it, softly, slowly, through wood and wind and whisper. So now as your eyelids begin to grow heavier, and the sounds of the sea begin to blend into something soft and rhythmic, you let your mind drift. No need for a clock, no need to count. Just rock with the ship, back and forth. You made it through the night. You felt the hours pass. You watched time unfold like canvas in the wind. And now, you can let it go. Let the sails catch your thoughts. Let the waves smooth the edges of your memories. Let the wind carry you somewhere quiet, somewhere timeless. Because out here, in the lull of morning light, with the sea breathing gently below, time is no longer something you chase. It's something that cradles you, something that rocks you to sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams.